Welcome to Lesson 5. Now that we've discussed the various aspects of purple teaming, let's walk through an example where we put it all together. In this lesson, you'll get a reference example to start with as you decide how to plan, run, and follow up from a purple team. To start, and this is especially important on your first purple team with an organization, you'll get buy-in from the key stakeholders. Each organization is different, but at least consider your CISO, CIO, legal team, SOC leadership, and network or system administrators. This might be their first exposure to purple teaming, and they might consider it risky. Take time to explain the benefits of purple teaming and that the emulation will be done by a trained team operating with safety measures in place to avoid disruption or violating privacy. Ask them about what they'd want to get out of a purple team and how you could measure return on investment. Establishing this up front will help you craft the purple team and documentation to be sure they see meaningful value from the purple team. Finally, get their approval in writing and try to get upfront approval for a recurring series of purple events to make this easier in the future. Once you're approved, talk to the defensive team to understand their prioritized threats, risks, and gaps. Discuss ideas they have to close those gaps, and brainstorm how you could use purple teaming to explore those ideas. Figure out their current data collection and analytics status so you can identify any gaps that you'll need to fill to enable the purple teaming. See the MAD Threat Hunting and Detection Engineering course for more details on how to develop hypotheses, identify data needs, and collection gaps. Finally, refine the ROI, purpose, and scope concepts you developed with the initial stakeholders. The defensive team will likely have a different perspective on these and could help you define them more concretely. Now that you know what the stakeholders and defenders want, it's time to do some in-depth research. What are the defensive ideas in the community around this topic? Search security researcher blogs, analytic repositories, attack evals reports, and sensor configuration guides to understand the breadth of log events, network traffic, and analytics the defenders might want to try out during the purple team. You'll want to have a deep understanding of the malicious behavior involved, why adversaries use it, and how it works technically. Importantly, it'll be valuable to know what observables might be generated by that activity so you can compare those with current defensive collection and identify gaps. See the MAD Threat Hunting and Detection Engineering course for more details on how to research malicious behavior. If you have an in-house red team, that's a great place to start. But remember, there are many emulation service providers to consider as well. In either case, you'll need to work with the emulation team to review the purpose, scope, and rules of engagement for the purple team and ensure that they can safely implement the required behaviors. To help the defenders explore the chosen concept well, talk to the emulation team about possibly sequencing multiple implementations of the behaviors to start with common and easy to defend implementations before escalating to less common and more evasive versions. This will enable you to pace out the purple team event according to the progress made by the defenders. Discuss what kind of emulated activity might make sense before, during, and after the primary behavior to provide realistic context for the defenders. Now that you have a plan with the emulation team, circle back with the appropriate authorities in your organization to make sure it complies with their requirements. Now you have a good understanding of the defensive ideas you want to explore, how the emulation will proceed, and what kind of observables you'll want for the purple team. You need to make sure you have an environment that can facilitate all of that in a way that complies with the rules of engagement. If you need an external system for this purple team, consider leveraging an external cyber range as a service, or building your own. If you decide to build your own, make sure to consider all of the environmental requirements. The range will need to have sufficient scale and technologies to enable the emulation, and to present a challenge to the defenders. The range also needs a SIEM that defenders can access. One of the biggest challenges with using an external system is to create sufficiently confusing and realistic background activity such that defenses developed in this range are applicable to your production environment. At this stage, you know what kinds of events and traffic the defenders are likely to use, so check the production environment to see what activity generates those observables in production, and try to recreate those in this external range. Try to mimic the statistical distribution of events and field values as well. Make sure the noise isn't too easily filtered out by defenders. Regardless of where you purple team, ensure there is a system for the emulators to launch their activity and that they have the required credentials for the planned activity. Make sure the environment is well instrumented, especially given what your research indicated defenders will need. At this stage, you have enough information to proceed with the final preparations. So set a date and send invitations. If the group of participants is large enough, you might also find some people to help you facilitate the event, answering questions, troubleshooting, and running breakout groups. Remember to leave time at the start of the event for logging in and troubleshooting. Two weeks ahead of the event, I recommend having a first rehearsal of the event. Make sure the infrastructure, emulation, and defenses are all working as expected. You're essentially executing the purple team during this rehearsal, except without all of the participants. You and your team will now have 2 weeks to fix any issues that you discover. Now, 1 week before the event, you should have a second rehearsal, which is designed to validate that the changes made since the first rehearsal have taken effect and no new issues are uncovered. If there are large issues still remaining, you might need to postpone the date of the event. Now the big day has finally arrived. As I mentioned in Lesson 3, your team should start about 1 hour ahead of the event to do a final pre-flight check. You can also notify participants to try their logins during this hour as well, so you can troubleshoot with them before the event starts. When it's time to start, introduce the participants and yourself and give an overview of the event, the environment, the SIEM, and the offensive behavior. This gets everyone on the same page. Ask the emulation team to execute their first round of emulation and let the defenders start trying out their ideas. In some cases, you might get them started with a sample query as well. Now you're finally in the purple teaming. You've put in a lot of hard work preparing for this, so the emulation, noise generation, and data collection should all be going well, and the defenders should be digging in, experimenting with different approaches. Give them time to explore. I've found that 20 to 30 minutes is a good time window for this initial session. It gives defenders enough time to get oriented and try out some initial approaches, but it's short enough to ensure no one is falling behind the broader group, and you have a check-in to see how progress is going. You should run your analytics right away as an in-flight check to make sure those are working as expected. And then, during the 20 to 30 minutes, you and your team should rotate around the defenders to check in with them. If they're struggling, help them out. If they're bored, give them a challenge. Note the different approaches that you see the defenders taking so you can ask those people to share with the group when you reconvene. At the end of the first 20 to 30 minute session, pull the group back together for a heading check. Ask for some feedback on how it's going from their perspective. Encourage people to share their various approaches with the broader group. And based on their progress so far, start adjusting your plan. Was 30 minutes too short? Too long? Maybe you need to share information from blue to red or from red to blue to keep the group progressing. You might need to talk to the emulation team privately to adjust their plan based on how the defenders are doing. Are they ready to move on to new implementations, or should we spend more time on what's already been emulated? Are there new defensive ideas emerging that the emulators could take into account in future rounds to help the defenders improve? With a newly adjusted plan, start the next round of emulation and detection. During the event, there are some common issues that might arise. Here are some ideas for how to deal with those. If defenders are struggling, give them more information. Remind them of analytics from the community, give them more insight about the emulation, or pair them up with someone who's doing really well. In some cases, they might just be having technical issues with the seam and need help with syntax or interpreting an event. On the other end of the spectrum, you might have some defenders who quickly succeed and get bored. There's almost always a new challenge for them, though, and you can help push them to continue to improve, even if you personally don't know of a better defensive idea. For example, you can ask the emulators to execute a more evasive implementation, or ask the defenders, who are doing so well, to put on their red hat and try to defeat their own analytic. Then challenge them to write a new analytic that couldn't be evaded that way. You could also pair this person up with a teammate who's struggling. Finally, sometimes the infrastructure causes some unforeseen issue despite all of the rehearsals. So work with the infrastructure team to see if there's a way to update sensor configurations or modify the environment to facilitate some new defensive ideas, or allow the emulation to proceed. In some cases, you might decide to let the emulation team disable the blocking mitigations using some realistic techniques from CTI. Now, the Purple Team event itself might be a single day, or it might be a multi-day event. In this example, we're showing it as a one-day event. In any case, you'll want to immediately document as much as you can while things are fresh when the event ends. Have a hot wash with participants to get their feedback, and have a short discussion about next steps. Make sure you clean up any changes to the environment based on the emulation or new sensor configurations and credentials created for the Purple Team. Soon after the event, make sure to consolidate all of this information and start writing up reports for the relevant stakeholders. Get the word out about how things went. Send reports to the stakeholders. You might also want to set up outbriefs to them to dive into the reports and answer their questions. Review the defensive ideas you explored and consider if and what could be shared externally on a blog or contributed to an analytic repository. And follow up with the defensive, emulation, and infrastructure teams to ensure the recommended actions are understood and plans are put in place to act on them. Now, ideally, these recurring Purple Team events will incrementally improve your defenses over time. And the gaps that you're closing will get smaller and smaller, and you'll be able to focus on less common and more evasive behaviors and challenge your defenders as they gain a deeper understanding of malicious behavior and how to detect and handle it. You'll also be building evidence of your ability to detect these emulated behaviors. You might think about this in terms of having an attack matrix that is color-coded with how well you're defending against the different techniques, and show your stakeholders how that is improving over time. As we discussed in some of the previous lessons, the emulation team, if that's an in-house team, they might also be benefiting from these Purple teamings, and understanding how your defenses work and thinking of new ways to help improve them. So in summary, executing a purple team can be fun and insightful, but you need to document, share, and act on your findings to make sure you reap the benefits. And finally, really consider making this a recurring activity. It'll help people plan ahead, it'll get people into this mindset, and it will enable you to improve more rapidly.